Dust floated in shafts of morning light cutting through the slats of the Patterson barn roof, casting a golden haze over the auction ring. Men lined the rails in silence, their weathered faces marked by years of sun and hard work. Among them stood Buckland Ward, the longtime auctioneer, his gavel paused in the air. In the center of the ring, the chestnut horse lay crumpled in the dirt, chest heaving, legs trembling. He had collapsed without warning, and for a moment, time itself held its breath. Zinnia Rae, just 9 years old, had never seen a horse fall like that. She stood frozen by the rail, her hand over her mouth, tears threatening to spill. Then, with a kind of quiet defiance, she slipped through the fence. A few gasps echoed, but no one moved to stop her. She knelt beside the animal, Rusty, her grandfather's old companion, and placed a gentle hand on his sweat-drenched neck. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to run anymore." The men watched, silent and unsure. Orville Kincaid, a rancher known for valuing meat over memories, leaned over the railing with a grunt. "That horse is done," he muttered. "Put him down or move on." Buckland didn't move. The gavel trembled in his grip. Zinnia looked up, her voice clear and shaking. "He's not done. He's just tired. He gave everything he had for people who forgot what he was worth." Jasper Tullis, the barn's owner, shifted uncomfortably. Ephraim Galt and Clovis Reddick exchanged glances, both old enough to remember Zinnia's grandfather and what Rusty had once meant to this town. Abram Wexler, the local vet, stepped forward to speak, but hesitated. Even he knew the girl's words had hit something deeper than logic. The room was quiet again, the dust swirling like smoke in a church. Zinnia stood slowly, brushing her hair from her face, her hand still resting on Rusty's mane. "I want to buy him," she said. The men chuckled under their breath. "With what?" Clovis asked gently, not unkindly. Zinnia's lips trembled. "With what I've got," she said simply, and knelt back down beside Rusty. The animal flicked his ear and let out a slow, tired breath. Then a man in the back of the barn, silent until now, stepped forward and took off his hat. Denton Hale hadn't been seen in Patterson in years, and no one knew what he was doing there. He walked toward the center of the ring, eyes on the girl and the horse. The crowd parted, and what he said next would stop the auction cold. The barn was still. Every boot shuffled back as Denton Hale moved forward, his wide-brimmed hat clutched tight in his weathered hands. The man looked older than most remembered, with streaks of silver in his beard and lines around his eyes that hinted at years lived quietly, or in hiding. Buckland Ward's gavel dropped slightly, not striking wood, but just enough to acknowledge a shift. This wasn't part of the schedule. Denton stepped to the edge of the ring and locked eyes with Zinnia, who was still kneeling beside Rusty, her small fingers tangled in his mane. "I knew your grandfather," Denton said softly, his voice rough like gravel but sincere. "Wade Rae once saved a man's life in Amarillo." "That man was me." A murmur ran through the crowd. Clovis Reddick narrowed his eyes, recognition dawning slowly. Denton looked around. "I came here today for reasons I didn't understand, but now I do." His gaze returned to Zinnia. "This horse stays with her. I'll cover whatever he's worth." The barn went silent again. Orville Kincaid scoffed and stepped forward, crossing his arms over his chest. "You can't just walk in here and make declarations, Denton. This is an auction, not a charity drive." His voice was sharp, but the conviction in Denton's face didn't falter. Buckland raised a hand to keep things from escalating. "We run on rules here," Buckland said carefully. "But we also remember what this town is made of." Zinnia didn't speak. She just stared up at Denton with wide eyes, her breath caught in her throat. Ephraim Galt stepped forward next. "Wade was a good man," he said slowly, "and if this little girl is anything like him, we'd be fools to treat her like she don't matter." That was all he said, but the words carried weight. Even Orville hesitated, chewing his bottom lip. Buckland finally lowered the gavel, setting it on the podium with a thud that echoed through the rafters. "If there ain't no objections, I say we let the girl take the horse." No one spoke. Even Jasper Tullis, who cared more for numbers than sentiment, gave a slow nod. Zinnia closed her eyes and pressed her forehead to Rusty's neck, relief washing over her like rain on dry soil. But just as people began to turn and disperse, a slow, deliberate clap echoed from the far end of the barn. A tall, sharp-eyed man leaned against the back rail, untouched by the emotion in the room. Thaddeus Rook. No one had noticed him enter, and the look on his face didn't feel like approval. Thaddeus Rook's slow, deliberate clapping echoed like gunshots in the still barn. The sound turned every head. He stood tall in a long black coat, his eyes cold and unreadable beneath the brim of his dark hat. His presence felt like a shadow stretching across the room. Buckland Ward tensed behind the podium. No one had expected Rook, least of all Denton Hale, who narrowed his eyes but said nothing. "Touching scene," Rook said dryly, his boots scraping over the dirt as he stepped forward. "Really, brings a tear to the eye. But let's not pretend we all forgot what that horse was involved in." The words dropped like a stone into the room. Zinnia clutched Rusty tighter, sensing a shift in the mood. Ephraim Galt's brow furrowed. "This ain't the time, Thaddeus," he warned. But Rook didn't stop. "That animal belonged to Wade Rae, sure," Rook continued, "but y'all know what happened the year before Wade died. That fire didn't start itself. And some folks say Rusty was seen running loose from the property that night." A few gasps rose from the back of the barn. Zinnia looked up, her eyes wide. She had heard rumors, whispers around town, but her mother never spoke of that fire. Denton stepped forward, his voice low and firm. "That's enough." Rook didn't flinch. "I'm just saying, folks got short memories when emotions run high." He glanced at Orville, who smirked, clearly pleased that someone else had finally challenged the moment. Buckland slammed his gavel once, not to sell anything, but to silence the noise. "You got proof of anything, Thaddeus?" he asked. "Or are you just here to stir the pot again?" Rook shrugged and leaned back against a post, saying nothing more. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Zinnia rose slowly, brushing dirt from her jeans. Her hands were shaking, but she stood tall. "Rusty didn't hurt anybody," she said quietly, but loud enough for all to hear. "He ran because he was scared. Same as any of us would have been." Her voice trembled, but it carried weight. The room remained quiet, every man weighing the past against what stood before them now. Clovis Reddick sighed deeply, then muttered, "Sometimes people blame the wrong soul, just 'cause it's easier." Buckland looked at Denton, then back to Zinnia. "You still want the horse, even after all this?" She nodded without hesitation. "Then it's done," Buckland said. But as the barn began to clear, Rook lingered in the shadows, his arms crossed, watching. And in his silence, there was a promise. This wasn't over. The barn was nearly empty now. Dust hung heavy in the air, stirred only by the last of the boots scuffing the floorboards. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the old siding. Zinnia stood alone beside Rusty, who had managed to sit up, his head resting gently against her side. She could hear the murmurs outside, voices repeating Rook's words, dragging up questions she never thought she'd have to answer. Denton Hale remained nearby, arms crossed as he watched the girl quietly. "He was lying," Zinnia said without looking at him. "Wasn't he?" Denton hesitated. "He was twisting something, like he always does. But the fire, that part's true." The words hit her like a chill down her back. She turned slowly, her face pale. "My mom never talks about it. I only know Grandpa's barn burned down a year before he died." Denton nodded. It wasn't just a barn. It was his breeding stable. 4 horses died. Expensive ones. The sheriff ruled it an accident, faulty wiring or something. But folks never really accepted that. Zinnia blinked back tears. And they think Rusty had something to do with it? Some say he ran from the fire, Denton replied. Others say he started it. Kicked a lamp, maybe. It doesn't matter. What matters is that your grandfather never blamed him. He spent everything rebuilding for that horse. Outside, Buckland Ward and Clovis Reddick stood near the fence, speaking in hushed tones. I never liked the way Rook slithered back into town, Clovis muttered. He's always looking to cash in on someone else's ruin. Buckland nodded. He doesn't stir unless there's something in it for him. Ephraim Galt joined them, arms folded. Whatever he's planning, that girl better be ready. Rook ain't the type to let things lie. Inside the barn, Zinnia sat beside Rusty again, staring at his tired eyes. I don't care what they say, she whispered. You didn't mean to hurt anyone. I know you didn't. Rusty let out a long, steady breath. It was the first peaceful sound he'd made all day. Somewhere deep in her gut, Zinnia knew something about that fire had never made sense. And for the first time, she felt it might be her responsibility to uncover the truth. As she gently stroked Rusty's mane, the door creaked open. Hoyt Callahan, the town sheriff, stepped inside, his wide frame backlit by the setting sun. He removed his hat and looked at her with something between concern and curiosity. I heard there's some things bein' said, he began slowly. And I reckon it's time we clear the air. Sheriff Hoyt Callahan stepped further into the barn, his boots crunching on the dirt floor. The light from outside faded quickly behind him, casting long shadows across the space. He looked at Zinnia with a mix of fatherly concern and duty. You mind if I sit a spell? He asked. Zinnia shook her head and scooted to make room. Rusty raised his head slightly as Hoyt settled onto an overturned feed bucket. I was the one who filed the report on the fire, Hoyt said, voice low, like he wasn't ready to share the full truth out loud. That night, things didn't feel right. Your granddad called me before the flames got out of control. Said he thought someone had been snooping around the barn earlier that day. Zinnia's eyes widened. Someone? Hoyt nodded. He didn't say who, just that something felt off. He was rattled. Wade Rae was never a man to rattle easy. Zinnia listened closely, her heart beating faster. Why didn't you investigate? She asked quietly. Hoyt sighed, looking down at his hands. I did what I could, but there was no sign of forced entry. No footprints. Nothing. Then when folks started whispering about Rusty being the one to knock over a lantern, Wade shut everyone down. He defended that horse with everything he had. Wouldn't let anyone question it. His voice grew softer. But I always felt like he was protecting more than just a horse. Outside, the sun had dipped below the hills, casting a dusky blue over the land. Buckland Ward stood near his truck, arms crossed, watching the barn. Jasper Tullis approached with a cigarette in his mouth. You think the girl's up for all this? He asked. Buckland shrugged. She's stronger than she looks. And Denton Hale ain't backing down anytime soon. The two men looked back toward the barn, where the past was beginning to stir like smoke from old ashes. Back inside, Zinnia looked from Hoyt to Rusty, then back again. If someone started that fire, she said slowly, and made it look like Rusty did it, then they were trying to ruin my grandfather. Hoyt didn't answer immediately. I've thought about that more times than I can count, he finally said. And I've got my suspicions. One of them's already sniffin' around again, Thaddeus Rook. The name made Zinnia's stomach twist. Hoyt stood, brushing the dust off his jeans. You're walkin' into something bigger than a horse, Zinnia Rae. You sure you're ready for that? She nodded, her hand resting firmly on Rusty's neck. If Grandpa was protecting a secret, I need to know what it was. The next morning came gray and heavy, with thick clouds rolling low over the hills like slow-moving smoke. Zinnia hadn't slept much. Every word from Sheriff Callahan echoed in her head, about the fire, the suspicion, and her grandfather's mysterious final phone call. She sat on the porch steps of the old Dawson house, Rusty grazing quietly in the nearby paddock. Denton Hale emerged from the barn, brushing dust from his coat. "You look like you've been thinking too hard," he said with a small smile. Zinnia glanced up at him. "Did you ever see the inside of Grandpa's old loft?" Denton shook his head. Wade was private. Real private. Never let folks upstairs unless it was about a sick animal or an emergency. Zinnia stood slowly. "Then I think we need to look." Her voice was soft but sure. Inside the old barn, the air was stale and thick with silence. The ladder to the loft creaked under their weight as they climbed. The loft was cluttered but preserved, like someone had left it in a hurry and never returned. Boxes stacked to the ceiling. Old bridles and gear. Faded photographs of horses on the walls. Zinnia moved through the dust, scanning every shelf. She paused near a battered trunk in the corner. Her fingers found the latch and snapped it open. Inside were piles of papers, receipts, and one weathered leather-bound notebook. She opened it gently. Her grandfather's handwriting filled the pages. Denton leaned over her shoulder as she turned each page carefully. Most of it was feed schedules, breeding records, and vet visits. But near the back, Zinnia found something different, a loose piece of paper, folded 3 times. It was a letter, unsent, dated 3 days before the fire. "To whom it may concern," it began. "If anything happens to me or my horses, look to Thaddeus Rook." Her hands trembled. Denton took the letter and read it again in silence. Downstairs, the barn door creaked open. Zinnia froze, clutching the notebook to her chest. Denton peeked through a crack in the loft floorboards. A black coat moved through the lower level. Thaddius Rook. He was alone, his boots echoing on the wood. He didn't call out. He was searching for something. Denton pressed a finger to his lips and motioned for Zinnia to stay still. The air thickened. Zinnia's heart pounded. The truth she had just found might be enough to clear Rusty and expose Rook. But now Rook was in the barn, and he wasn't supposed to know anyone else was. And if he found them, there was no telling what he might do. Zinnia clutched the notebook tightly against her chest as she crouched low in the loft's shadows. Denton Hale moved silently beside her, his face tight with focus. Below them, Thaddeus Rook's boots creaked on the barn floor as he moved methodically, opening cabinets and tapping on walls. He wasn't just snooping, he was searching for something specific. Denton leaned close to Zinnia's ear and whispered, "He's looking for the letter." Zinnia nodded slowly, her fingers white from gripping the notebook. Each second felt stretched thin as Rook made his way beneath them. He paused near the ladder, eyes scanning the structure. Zinnia held her breath. If he looked up, he might see them through the slats. Denton motioned for her to back away, toward the far end of the loft where an old grain chute dropped down into the tack room. It was tight, dusty, and hadn't been used in years, but it might be their only way out. They crawled toward it quietly, every creak of the wooden floor like thunder in Zinnia's ears. Below, Rook knocked something over and cursed under his breath. It gave them the cover they needed. Denton pried open the grain chute and peered inside. "It's tight, but it'll get you out," he said. "I'll go first, then pull you through." Zinnia hesitated, but the sound of Rook's boots moving closer erased any doubt. Denton slid down first, landing with a soft grunt. Zinnia squeezed in next, holding the notebook close to her chest as she slid through the narrow metal tunnel. Dust filled her nose and throat, and her heart thundered in her chest. When she dropped into the tack room, Denton caught her and helped her to her feet. The two of them slipped out the side door into the open air just as Rook's shadow passed over the loft hatch above. They didn't stop to speak, just ran. Across the paddock, past the corral, and into the edge of the woods behind the property. Only when they were deep enough that the barn was out of sight did they finally pause. Zinnia dropped to her knees, breathing hard. "He was going to find it," she whispered. "He knew exactly what he was looking for." Denton nodded grimly. "That letter ties him to the fire. He's scared now." Zinnia opened the notebook again, hands shaking, and looked at the letter one more time. "We need to show this to Sheriff Callahan," she said. Denton agreed. But just then, through the trees, they saw a flicker of headlights coming up the long gravel road. Slow, deliberate. And the truck pulling in wasn't the sheriff's. The sound of gravel crunching beneath tires echoed through the quiet woods. Denton stepped in front of Zinnia protectively, his eyes fixed on the truck creeping up the old road. The headlights cut through the trees like knives, slow and deliberate, as if whoever was driving didn't want to surprise, or be surprised. "That's not Callahan," Denton muttered. Zinnia held the notebook tighter against her chest. The weight of her grandfather's secret now felt heavier than ever. As the truck rolled into view, Denton squinted. The vehicle was old, a rusted green Ford with a dented fender. When it finally stopped, the engine idled for a moment before shutting off. The door opened slowly. To their surprise, it wasn't Thaddeus Rook who stepped out. It was Clovis Reddick. He raised a hand. "Don't run. I ain't here to make trouble," he called out gently. Denton relaxed just slightly, but his body stayed between Zinnia and the truck. Clovis took a few slow steps forward. "I saw Rook pokin' around the barn," he said. "Figured if he's looking for something, it probably means you already found it." Zinnia and Denton exchanged glances. "Why would you help us?" Denton asked. Clovis sighed, removing his hat and holding it in his hands. "Because I owe Wade Rae, and because I kept quiet too long." He looked directly at Zinnia. "There's more to that fire than just Rook." Zinnia stepped forward, her voice trembling. "You know who started it?" Clovis hesitated. "I don't know for sure. But I know Wade suspected Rook was being paid off by someone who wanted the Dawson bloodline of horses gone. There was talk that Wade had something, a breeding secret, some old journal that proved his horses were the strongest in the region. Rook tried to buy Rusty 3 times before the fire. Wade refused. He looked at the notebook in Zinnia's hands. "That it?" She nodded. "There's a letter inside. Grandpa wrote it days before the fire. He named Rook." Clovis looked toward the road nervously. "Then you need to get that to Sheriff Callahan before Rook figures out you've got it. If he hasn't already." Denton clenched his jaw. "He's close. He was in the barn not even 20 minutes ago." Suddenly, a crack of a branch snapped in the woods behind them. All three turned at once. Footsteps. Slow, heavy. Denton grabbed Zinnia's hand. "Run." But before they could move, a voice cut through the trees, low and cold. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you." It was Thaddeus Rook. And he wasn't alone. Thaddeus Rook stepped into view, flanked by a younger man with a hard jaw and cold eyes, a stranger neither Denton nor Clovis recognized. The man carried himself like muscle for hire, silent but threatening. Rook's coat swayed slightly with the wind as he walked closer. "You've been busy," he said, eyes locked on Zinnia. "Climbing around in old barns, digging through secrets best left buried." Denton positioned himself in front of Zinnia again, his hand slowly moving toward the knife on his belt. "You knew this was coming, didn't you, Rook?" he said. "You've been covering your tracks since the night of that fire." Rook smiled faintly. "No, Denton. I've been cleaning up your grandfather's mess. Wade Rae was reckless. He clung to things that should have been sold, animals that should have been put down. He risked everything for sentiment. His eyes narrowed. Just like she is now. Zinnia stepped forward, ignoring Denton's protective stance. Her voice shook, but she held her ground. He didn't risk everything. He protected something good. And you tried to destroy it because you were afraid of losing control. She held up the leather-bound notebook. He named you in this. He knew what you did. Rook's face darkened, but he stayed still. The younger man stepped forward, but Rook stopped him with a glance. You won't win, Rook said slowly. Even if you give that to the sheriff, it's your word against mine. I've built this town's trust over the years. You're a child. And Denton's a ghost who only just crawled back into the daylight. Zinnia's fingers tightened around the book. Her voice rose, stronger this time. Then let the town see. Let them hear Grandpa's words. You might have fooled them once, but not this time. Not with Rusty's life on the line. Suddenly, headlights cut through the trees. A truck roared up the trail. It was Sheriff Hoyt Callahan, his vehicle coming to a hard stop just yards away. He stepped out slowly, hand resting on the holster at his hip. What's going on here? He asked, voice low and deadly calm. Rook didn't flinch. Just a misunderstanding, he said smoothly. But Hoyt's eyes were already on Zinnia, on the notebook in her hands. Zinnia walked forward and placed the notebook in the sheriff's hand. My grandpa wrote everything in there. About Rook. About the fire. About Rusty. Hoyt opened the cover, his expression unreadable. Silence fell over the woods. Rook finally took a step back, tension tightening in his jaw. And then Hoyt spoke, his voice cold as stone. Thaddeus, we need to have a talk. Sheriff Hoyt Callahan flipped through the pages of Wade Ray's notebook with steady hands. Every word written in that old, shaky script cut through the tension like a knife. Breeding records, threats received, and finally, the letter naming Thaddeus Rook as the man who tried to buy Rusty, and threatened to take him by force. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. Callahan looked up slowly, meeting Rook's eyes. I'm going to need you to come with me, he said flatly. For a moment, no one moved. Then the man beside Rook tensed, ready to react, but Rook raised a hand, stopping him. Don't be foolish, Rook muttered. He stared at Zinnia for a long time, his expression unreadable. You've got your grandfather's fire, he said finally. That's going to burn you someday. Zinnia didn't respond. She didn't need to. She simply stepped back toward Denton and Rusty, her job done. As Rook was led to the sheriff's truck, Clovis let out a slow breath and looked at Zinnia. I reckon you just changed a lot more than one horse's future today, kid. Denton placed a hand on her shoulder, nodding quietly. For the first time since her grandfather's death, Zinnia felt a weight lift, not just from her own heart, but from the air around her. The truth had been hidden for too long. Now it was free. In the following days, word spread quickly through the town. People who had once doubted Wade Ray came forward with their own memories, stories of his integrity, his devotion to his animals, and the kindness he'd shown to neighbors. Rusty, once dismissed as a tired, unwanted horse, became a symbol of that legacy. Donations poured in to help Zinnia care for him. And Buckland Ward, moved by what he'd witnessed, offered her free boarding space at the barn for as long as she needed. 1 week later, under the golden sky of a Montana evening, Zinnia rode Rusty through the fields her grandfather once walked. The horse, though still recovering, carried her with calm strength, ears flicking gently in the breeze. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. Forgiveness, freedom, and the unspoken bond between a girl and the animal that had carried her through the storm. At the edge of the pasture, she stopped and looked toward the hills. The sun was dipping low, painting the land in soft firelight. She thought of her grandfather, of his quiet strength, and the legacy he'd left behind. Some truths burn down barns. Others rebuild legacies.